This video is only one part of an in-depth review, so check out the rest at thegoodride.com. Thanks for watching. Welcome to The Good Ride. I'm James Beastie and I'm all that is average. And this is the Yes 420 powder hole, 154 for 2022. I rode this against the 2020 powder hole, the Y, and the hybrid. I mainly put on my Union Atlas and my Burton Kendos when I rode this, but I also tried my Burton Ions with this as well to get a little more response. And I've ridden this in a wide variety of conditions. In the past, I've ridden this in a good bit of powder. I've ridden this in all kinds of groomers, from ugly, uneven, bumpy groomers to basically spring conditions this year. I just got skunked. But it was nice to see how the new waist width, new specs performed on groomers, because it's a little more of a groomer board than just a dedicated powder board this year. And to give you a short summary, this is for sure a powder board first, but it's a little more of a groomer board than it was in the past. And it's got a pretty wide waist, wider nose and tail. It's got a very interesting hole in the nose and the tail that brings powder in and lifts up the nose, but still has this really interesting camber feel. So if you like true camber, but you want the float of boards with early rise, this might appeal to you. Now, talking sizing, in powder, I felt this was great for my size 9 boots and my 180 to 195 pounds, depending on the year and the time that I rode this. I like this newer shape a little better than the older one in terms of like riding groomers, but I still don't feel like it's a good match for me. Just for me, powder only. If you have a bigger foot, then groomers. Now, when it comes to the shape, it's tapered and directional, but it's not super tapered. And it's got a very interesting camber profile that is basically camber from tip to tail with just this funnel underneath. And let me show you this. It's so fascinating. It's just got this hole that goes all the way to about right here. The hole goes about to the inserts like it was hybrid camber, but it's not. And then here's the tail, and that goes about to the inserts as well. And what this hole does is it gives you a camber feel on the sides and the edges from tip to tail. And on groomers, you really feel like you're almost on a true camber board that's a little more hollow in the center. But then in powder, you have that lift like you do with early rise boards like the Y and the hybrid, but it feels more locked in. So it's a really interesting on snow feel compared to most boards. And when it comes to skidded turns, it's pretty tough to skid turns. So I would say advanced to expert riders only. Now let's talk flex. Pretty stiff. Yes, boards can sometimes be a little softer than what they say flex-wise, but this one isn't. It's pretty stiff throughout. Stiff in the nose and stiff in the tail, for sure. Just not much give. Maybe a touch more on the nose than the tail, but overall, pretty medium stiff to stiff. Compare that to the Y, similar flex, and the hybrid 153, little softer. More of a medium stiff flex. What the hell? Let's do, this is a little softer, just by a touch. And the 420 powder hole was a lot of work for me to butter on groomers and play around with, but it was doable. It had good pop, but it was a lot of work for me to access it. Just must be the width or something, but it wasn't like the Y or the hybrid or the Optimistic, which I don't have with me, but is kind of like there with the Y, a little bit more camber. When it comes to ollie power, I just really didn't feel like it was that easy to access all this pop, but there is a lot of pop there. And if I gave it a lot, it gave me a lot back. And it felt like it had a little more pop than the Y, a little bit more than the hybrid, but not by much. And then it felt about on par, but harder to access the ollie power than the Optimistic. The Optimistic is a modern camber, but it pops really easy. It's just kind of a lighter, poppier board. And this overall board personality, this flex personality, does really well in all conditions. I took this out in some hard spring snow, and it really absorbed everything well. You could tell you were on micro bumpy snow that froze the night before, but it wasn't bothering me at all. And it has just good dampness and speed to it, and it's just a pretty good all conditions ride as long as you're the right size boot for it. On Groomers in powder, this thing just, I love this kind of like not too long, not too short, and this flex personality, because it can power over stuff pretty well, and it's not gonna buck and bounce you around like some of those ultra short, wide boards out there for powder. And the base glide is on the upper tier. It's not amazing, but it's definitely more at the top of its class, and it's a board you can just bomb. For somebody my weight, this just had more speed than I was comfortable discovering, and I think this is a pretty bomby board for its size. Now, when it comes to edge hold, I felt like all the boards were better edge hold wise. This let go just a little bit easier in hard snow than all the other boards. The 2020 next to it with its mid bite did much better in hard snow. The Y with its underbite did much better in hard snow. It can handle hard to icy snow, no problem. So can the 2020, and so can the hybrid with its tapered underbite. Just all that disruption in the side cut with all these other boards does better than this, but it's still fine. It's just not gonna be like that confidence inspiring edge hold in really hard snow, but it's more of a powder board than the rest of these boards. Now, when it comes to turn initiation, in powder, I felt in the past, even when it was wider, it had competent turn initiation for me. It wasn't like a perfect tree board for somebody of my specs with my size 9 boots, but it was very doable. As long as I had a little space, the board could turn. But there's something interesting with this powder hole. Each side of this hole feels like it sticks in the snow and feels like camber. It's kind of like the exact opposite of Jones's Spoon Tech that lifts up and rolls easy edge to edge. With the powder hole in powder, you feel like you still have a full camber board from tip to tail, but it's not sinking. It's not ever gonna sink. It just holds up. But when you turn, you feel like you're turning a camber board, a full camber board. And it's a really unique experience. It's not good or bad, it's just different. So some might prefer maybe just a flat nose like you have with the Y, the Optimistic, and the hybrid. Or some might prefer the lifted sides like you have with the Hovercraft and with pretty much every Jones board now. And others might prefer this non-lifted down edge with this 420. It's just a really unique experience. It's all about personal preference. And I found that on Groomers, this side cut, it's deep, but this waist, this board is just so wide. For some reason, this 54 felt like a lot more work than the 54Y or the 53 hybrid. Even the 57 hybrid that I have too felt like less work than the 420 powder hole. Maybe it's the full camber, who knows what's going in secret sauce wise to this board in comparison to those. But it was just a lot of work for my size 9 boots. I kept leaning in and just nothing would happen. I'd just lean as hard as I could. I felt like I was starting to fold the ankle strap of my Atlas, and I never feel like that. and I felt like I just didn't have even close to enough boot with my Burton Kendo, and I usually don't feel that. It's a softer boot though. And even with the Ion, I felt like I needed to lean in more, and there was definitely a delay in response to get this over onto that deep side cut and get it to turn, but it felt hard for me to turn. Once I got it on edge, it carved pretty well, especially for a powder board, and you could feel the camber from tip to tail, and it felt like a hollow camber board. But overall, the turning experience and carving was much better with the Y, significantly better. It's significantly better with the Optimistic and much better with the Hybrid. All three of those boards just turn much better. I even had a better experience on the 2020. But still, if you have bigger feet like Davey did, he had a little more fun on the 420 powder hole than I did with the size 12s and 240 pounds, something like that. I've talked a lot already about how this board turns in powder, but let's talk about just general float in powder. With this tapered directional shape and this unique powder hole technology, and with the setback on board, you can actually get 2 3/4 inches back from center of board on reference stance with a 22.5 inch stance width, and you can get 4.625 inches back from center of board. It's pretty far back, but you still feel like you have some tail, and you don't feel like you're actually on a surf style snowboard where you're just all the way back on the tail, but it does feel kind of surfy and kind of like a snowboard. It's a nice balance between the two, and it's an interesting powder experience. I think personally I'm a little more into the Y or the Optimistic. I would like to take those out instead. And they have a pretty good setback on board too. I think it's like 4 inches from center of board all the way back. But I like the powder hole a little bit better than the Hybrid. The Hybrid's 3.375 inches back from center of board at a 23-inch stance width, which is pretty wide for me these days. It really frees the taint too much. And then, of course, if you want to ride centered and you don't want to set your board back at all, you've got the 2020 next to it, but it's just such a different board. So overall, I think this is a very unique board. It's not for everybody, but some people are just going to love this and just love that camber feel, but just endless float in powder. All our reviews are a best effort, objective opinion from an average rider's perspective. There's no brand oversight, and we're free to say whatever we want. We send back everything unless it's a favorite, then we ask to keep those or straight up buy them. Now, if you need advice, fill out the eHarmony profile in the Contact Us section of the site. It's the only way I can help you properly. If you want to support us, and if what we reviewed appeals to you, it helps if you buy through our links. So, thanks for watching.